Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to present the perspective of biodiversity and sustainable development from a global company's point of view. Shell is a global energy company with around 90,000 employees in more than 80 countries. And we in Shell believe that the energy challenge facing the world is formidable. How to deliver more energy, how to keep supplies secure, and at the same time reduce energy's environmental and social impacts. Our commitment to contribute towards sustainable development requires us to balance short and long-term interests and to integrate economic, environmental, and social considerations into our business decision-making. Today, I'll present to you how business and biodiversity are linked and how promoting and protecting biodiversity is a core value in Shell. I'll present how we contribute to sustainable development by both delivering benefits and reducing our impacts. Lastly, I will present how biodiversities can happen and should happen through shared responsibility, that biodiversity in sustainable cities should not just be the work of one, but the joint efforts of many, including the business sector. Shell's business actually covers the so-called upstream sector and the downstream sector. And in upstream, we search for, recover, and produce crude oil and natural gas. We also convert the natural gas into liquids by chemical means to yield cleaner burning fuels. And in downstream, we refine the oil and gas and sell a range of petroleum-based products for domestic, industrial, and transport use. We also develop biofuels and hydrogen and market the synthetic gas-to-liquids products. Sustainable development has been ingrained in how we do business. In fact, it has been embedded in our business principles since 1997, and you can see here excerpts from that business principle. In practice, we contribute to sustainable development by delivering benefits through our products and services and by reducing the impacts of our operations. So you can see here that we offer products which will, as we said, deliver benefits, better fuel efficiency, cleaner fuel, and sustainable mobility. But at the same time, it starts in our operations by making sure that, first of all, from a health and safety point of view, we have what we call Goal Zero, and we also practice product stewardship. And at the same time, we measure all these things which, as far as we're concerned, are important in terms of sustainable development. Livable cities, issues and dilemmas. Striking the right balance between economic development and biodiversity conservation remains a key sustainability challenge. Action is urgently required to reverse the trend of biodiversity loss, and this requires work not just from governments. Beyond policies and regulations that require business and consumers to reduce their environmental footprint, what is needed is to find ways to establish a stronger business case for biodiversity conservation. A public-private partnership has therefore become an imperative. It is key to identify new opportunities and mechanisms that can mobilize a broad coalition of businesses, technical experts, and other stakeholders around a shared vision of market-based or business-oriented approaches to biodiversity conservation. Shell's long-term energy scenarios show that global energy demand is expected to double or even triple by the year 2050, and a significant portion of this demand is expected to be met with oil and gas. Oil and gas activities are therefore likely to grow over the next few decades, with continued risk of impacting biodiversity. Protecting biodiversity is therefore crucial to the future of our operations. In addition to legal and regulatory incentives, there are strategic, operational, reputational, and financial reasons for Shell to focus on biodiversity. Employees and contractors simply appreciate employers who aspire to high environmental standards that in turn reflect their own values. Employees want to work for companies that care. By being seen and being credible as a good corporate citizen whose performance matches its words, we become the organization of first choice for customers, staff, investors, suppliers, partners, and the communities in which we operate. Financial institutions, investment banks, and export credit agencies are beginning to integrate biodiversity elements into conditions for lending to large infrastructure development, such as oil and gas projects. They are changing the way they assess companies' performance accordingly. In May 2000, we became the first energy company to publish a biodiversity standard, which provides shell companies with an overall management framework and direction on biodiversity. This biodiversity standard spells out our commitment to work with others to maintain our ecosystems which have been put in place. Business investments in support of biodiversity come in different forms, which might include direct financial contributions to protected area management, support for scientific research, or government capacity building, which have been proven to be particularly valuable, especially in cities where capacity and resources for protecting the environment are limited. Shell currently has around 100 biodiversity-related projects worldwide, ranging from conservation, science, and environmental education to capacity building and communication projects. Shell has worked closely with governments, NGOs, and other stakeholders to identify and implement effective programs and strategies toward biodiversity conservation, and in particular in promoting sustainability of cities. Let me give you some examples of this project, and these examples come from the Philippines, where I come from. And the first is actually the Malampaya Deepwater Gas Project. And Malampaya Gas actually supplies 30% of the Philippines' electricity requirements. Through our joint efforts with the Malampaya joint venture partners, we help develop sustainable cities through numerous community development projects in a number of provinces like Batangas, Mindoro, and Palawan in the Philippines. One such project is the Sanayan sa Kakayahang Agrikultura, or this is actually training out-of-school youths on new farming technologies and organic farming methods, while emphasizing that farming is a viable business enterprise if properly managed. To date, over 1,000 beneficiaries have benefited from this program. What's important is we convince people in the rural areas that they do not have to go to the cities to earn a living. We see this as supply management. Now, while on one hand we are looking at how we can keep people in the provinces or in the rural areas, on the other, we have also tackled, I'll give you an example of how we have tackled urban decay. And here, we have actually supported the Pasig River Rehabilitation Program, a multi-sectoral initiative spearheaded by an environmental NGO with various cities in Metro Manila. Pasig River actually snakes through a number of cities and municipalities in Manila, and one can compare it with the River Thames in London. The problem there is the river is so polluted, and you can see here, this is an example of one of the canals, we call it estero, that leads or actually puts water into the river. And here you can see that there's been a lot of informal settlers. This is an example of where there's so much garbage, water can hardly flow. This is the before and the present. Again, it's a combination of informal settlers, very bad solid waste management, and this contributes to pollution, environmental degradation. And what has happened is that we have worked with a number of NGOs to actually, one, clean up the river, two, relocate the settlers there. And this is the building behind it is a school, and you can see that on the other side of the fence of the school are houses that were built. We have since relocated these people and the communities there, and we have planted trees and plants on the river banks. And also, most of the things that have been planted are actually reed banks, because apparently they are good also in filtering the pollution. And so hopefully this is just one of several canals that needs to be cleaned up to ensure that the river really gets back to its original pristine. Now, pristine is you can never even call it pristine, you know. If you see the river, people were telling me, those in their 80s, that they used to swim in the river with lots of life. Now, or maybe about 10 years ago, the river has been so polluted that if you swim there, you'll get sick. But we now see slowly start of life coming back. We see some fishes coming back into the river, but still a lot needs to be done. Now, that's the river. But as I mentioned earlier, a large part of this are because informal settlers have started moving in and living in these riverbanks. We have actually partnered with an NGO called Gawad Kalinga on a number of development projects in the Philippines. And this one is about building homes. It's similar to Habitat, but in this case, the equity of the recipients is a sweat equity. They are the poorest of the poor. They cannot pay back any loan. So what happens is that they contribute their labor, that's their equity, and here you can see some of our staff helping build homes for them. What this does, I think, is this builds pride in people who have never owned homes, and also they brings back the faith in their fellow man because they see a lot of people helping whom they don't really know. And one part is providing homes, but the other one is actually in providing livelihood. It's one thing to have a home, and after a few weeks, I think the euphoria will diminish, and reality sets in because you need food. So what we have done is we have actually supported livelihood programs, one of which, especially if it's in the rural areas, we normally relocate the residents back to where they came from. And this is where actually we provide them with livelihood because many of them move to the city because there's no livelihood, and at the same time also because they're victims of natural calamities, landslides, flooding, part of which were because of environmental degradation. So we have partnered with Gawad Kalinga in a program aimed to eradicate hunger in the Philippines. It's a very lofty aspiration. But the idea here is to support the food sustenance program with the establishment of what we call bayan anihan sites or community harvest in villages all over the country. In the Philippines, there are 4 million households or 20 million Filipinos at present who are suffering from what we call involuntary hunger. Fortunately, as of when we launched the program in March 2009, it has already reaped a total of 60 metric tons in the first harvest alone, and this continues to grow. The program aims not only to provide Filipinos a long-term food source, but to restore human dignity as it liberates an individual from reliance to sufficiency. So lastly, I'd like to say that partnership is joint action. By working with others, Shell is able to address hopes and concerns related to our business operations, as well as bring benefits to the environment and society. We are truly delighted that we were made part of the discussion in the World City Summit, where businesses such as ourselves have the opportunity to build a shared vision and draw a roadmap of the future with government leaders and other industry experts and define sustainability challenges. More importantly, the summit and similar types of collaborative action enable us to define the opportunities, share innovative approaches, and forge important partnerships toward our common aims of supporting the growing population and allowing us to live well in our cities in the coming years. Thank you very much, and mabuhay sa inyo lahat. Thank you.